always glad to have Stephan Bonfield on hand to help us out with all the definitive knowledge on the topics, which is always fascinating. And we also have Jubilee, the scenic designer for Carmen, who will talk us through what some of the concept and how it formed and where we're going with it. We're in week 2 of our rehearsals, and it's going excellent, very well. It's a fabulous cast, great director. We are rehearsing for the first time at our production facility. We normally rehearse over at the Jubilee up in a rehearsal hall, and we decided, well, let's align things better with our admin offices and our costume department, scenic department. So we've created a rehearsal hall, and so far, so good. I think it's fabulous. We actually roll big set pieces in and work on them. It's amazing. And doesn't mean that the cast doesn't have to travel 40 minutes each way to get a costume fitting, and then it's remarkable. So we're very happy about that. And so Carmen is underway, and it portends to be quite good. So I'll leave it over to these two to take you through and enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you for welcoming us. And I'm Stephan Bonfield, and I'm going to try and be, once again, something of a genial host this evening in discussing Carmen, but also with my wonderful friend Camille Coo, who has come in from Toronto to do the costumes for the set for this, but not the costumes as she did when she did Tales of Hoffman, which you might remember a few years ago, which was a remarkable and absolutely wonderful production. I loved it. I loved that Hoffman so much, because as it is, it's already one of my favorite operas. Carmen, as it stands, is not one of my favorite operas, but it's a great opera. In fact, I never really cared for it until about 15 years ago, and then I fell in love with it, and I have not been able to stop loving this wonderful work and learning more and more about it. I don't know how many times I've seen it live. It's around 10 with various companies from here to New York, and it is a great opera. It is a magnificent opera. It is arguably the most popular opera that has ever been attended in the last 100 years. It is arguably the most popular opera regardless what anybody thinks. And why not? At least it's certainly part of the ABCs of opera: Aida, Bohème, Carmen. And you know, once you of course establish that, it's very, very difficult to step back further from that fact. So Carmen, the way we're going to approach it tonight at this wonderful Opera Insight discussion, our Opera 101 is going to feature just me talking a little bit about it historically, its background, what made it important, why it became important, and then I think Camille and I are going to just talk for a few minutes in general about the production, and then Camille will give what will probably be a beautiful presentation showing, of course, her slides of the set, and she's also brought her maquette so that she can refer to that. And also, I think that after that, I'd like to just ask her a few questions, and then I think all of you should ask Camille some questions. Or worse still, you can ask me some questions. So let's begin with just a general discussion of some of the things I think that most everybody here already knows about Carmen. This is a reinvention of an opera genre that had really all but died out by the beginning of the 18th century in France. It was a lyric tragedy. It was an opera designed for absolutely the wrongest, most wrong opera building in Paris, and that was the Opéra Comique. This is not meant to be an opera comique whatsoever. It is really, in many respects, a compromise, because it is not grand opera, it's certainly not comic opera, but it's something that stands somewhere in the middle in a zone for a building that just simply had not been built yet, and in a genre that had not yet ascended. And this is what makes Carmen a problem for the 1870s. It is not only the wrong genre, it is also an opera that speaks to so much freedom and independence and individuality for a woman who absolutely cannot be pinned down and absolutely must be free. And this, of course, in and of itself is a brand new discussion in the Romantic era, or moving toward the end of the Romantic era. And this is, of course, an emphasis, a point of emphasis that's going to come up in this production without a doubt. This production is not set in 1820, or as often as erroneously reported on the web, 1830. This is really set in about 1820. with the last dying embers of the French occupation army trying to hang on to Spain in a manner that really was unbefitting of the post-Napoleonic era. And also, it was just a time where the Spanish insurgency in the hills was making life absolutely miserable and awful for the French army. And so there was a great deal of sympathy for that by the 1870s, because the French, of course, did wonder what in heck were we doing there to begin with. And so there is this mildly political overtone that tends to walk through Carmen, in which case the soldiers are occupying this rather interesting territory in a plaza at the very, very beginning, and making comments about, you know, these strange people who keep coming and going, making comments about the local color of the Spanish folk. And in so many ways, the way the army is looked at in Carmen represents a kind of put down for what it really means for it to be there, without a doubt. And this is, of course, why the children's chorus comes out and mocks the army, not only once, but strangely, twice. I mean, why would that musically, motivically, structurally exist in Act 1? Well, because it is, in a way, a mild form of deriding the French occupation. So, in that sense, we have a very, very important continuity, a carry-through, and that is the history of Spain and its time of independence, its time of revolution, which, at the time that this opera is set, more or less, it overlaps with the Spanish Revolution itself, with the Great War of Independence from 1808 to 1814. And it is a reference to that constantly. So Carmen, in a way, is an emblem of that independence, not just a feminist emblem as we might take it today, but it is also a political emblem. And in that sense, it makes, I think, a great deal, or at least it creates a great deal of currency to set this opera wonderfully just before the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s. The history of Spain and the history of Spanish politics and the history of Spain's back and forward between left and right, between fascist and republican, between socialist and other extremes, is well documented. It is a tragic time in Spanish history in the 20th century, and it really, really makes good sense to set this opera, I believe, in this time. Although this is not an overly political telling that we're going to see, it is remarkably consistent with how we can transport Carmen into a century that I think we can tie ourselves into a little bit more relevantly, and also with a great deal more focus. What does Carmen stand for? Well, for many writers who went and saw Carmen after Bizet died and never knew of the great success that it was going to become, we all know, of course, that he died mostly convinced and brokenhearted that Carmen was not going to be a success. Contrary to the myth, Carmen did not kill Bizet. He did not die because of Carmen. He died because Bizet was something of an idiot. He didn't listen to his doctors. He was told, you've got a lung ailment and you've got a weak heart. Whatever you do, don't do anything silly. He goes for a swim in a very, very cold river. He catches cold, and he wonders why he's going to die in his mid-30s, like so many other great composers who died in their 30s. And that was unfortunately what happened to Bizet. Bizet just simply had a health condition, and he precipitated his own demise. But of course, he was depressed about Carmen. There's no doubt that that probably could have played some role. We have to factor that in. But regardless, Carmen, as a great hit that it became continentally in the 1880s and beyond, affected so many writers, many of them queued up again and again for multiple performances. Many writers saw Carmen 10, 20, even 30 times. They were obsessed with it. They were obsessed with its messages of freedom, with la liberté, and of course with its fate, destiny, motives that were constantly intertwined, like a golden braid marching through all 4 acts. And this, of course, is used to great extent in this production as well, because in so many ways, this Carmen has been really mocked up herself as the image of freedom and, of course, of revolution. And we'll sort of see that in the costuming. You know, Mercedes and Frasquita have guns, for example. There's a lot of guns, apparently, in this production. So there's that sense that in the epic tour de force of violence that is Spanish history in this time period, and in many time periods, the Glorious Revolution, the War of Independence, all of the above, there's a kind of destiny of the Spanish nation, I think, that is mounted in this production as well, and Carmen becomes the emblem of that too. It is, of course, much, much more complex than that in history. Spanish history is very, very difficult to really pin down as being one thing or another. There are many, many facets and many, many sides. There was much bloodshed and much violence. And smartly, this production tries not to go down one path politically or another. You're not going to see great mock-ups of Picasso's Guernica, for example, his 1937 great anti-war piece. This is not that sort of Carmen. But it is a kind of Carmen that at least can get us to draw closer to something of what liberty can stand for in the embodiment of one individual, and especially in the embodiment of French takes on exoticism at that time. One of the most important features of Carmen is that it actually presages a lot of Puccini's writing. I don't mean stylistically, but the subjects that he found interesting, the exotic subjects from far-off lands. It also presages a lot of the ideas surrounding what it means to write an opera that takes us outside of the domain of the wealthy blue bloods that we tend to see on stage in the 1860s and 1870s, and the decline of that, not only in the operas of Wagner, but even Verdi moving further and further away from writing about royalty. And this is referred to as verismo. So, of course, Bizet is not Italian, he's not writing a verismo opera, but he is in many ways writing the first of its kind that would inspire the veristi after him. This is the first great opera that really exploits this theme to any remarkable extent. And Milac and Halévy, who were the librettists who reduced Prosper Mérimée novella, did a great job of this because they really could zero in on that in the sense that they were mining a growing academic new field that was trying to work more with what it was at this level, psychologically, to come apart. That is, to not write the great romantic conclusion, but actually write the great tragic conclusion, where someone's interior being is itself so eroded that it is finally lost. And this is indeed what happens to our José in this production, perhaps even more so, but I won't give the end away. So this is a remarkable feature that I think carries forward also well into the 20th century. And our director, I think, has really understood this. And by setting it in the 1930s, with 1930s costuming and with appropriate accoutrements, I think we are moving and transporting Carmen and everything that is important about it into something closer to our time. Bizet's Carmen was, in and of itself, a shock because, of course, there were various things happening on stage that the audience in the Opera Comique really just could not quite comprehend. There were women smoking on stage. This, of course, is a brand new, outstanding, and shocking concept. If you consider that the Opera Comique is the place where you bring your marriageable young daughter for a coming out, so that she can meet a marriageable young man, so that more or less political, economic mergers can take place socially. The Opera Comique, putting Carmen on, was an immense risk. And indeed, there were multiple resignations by the staff running the Opera Comique because they just didn't want to be involved. Others were pushing for it. It wasn't a black and white concept that the Opera Comique did not want to run this. There were many actually who were behind a newer, edgier opera. And in that regard, when we go to our Carmen today, and we watch what takes place, you know, we have that comfort, right? I mean, we can take in whatever we want and say, well, I like the hit tunes. You know, or I really know the plot already, and that's fine, and I know the direction that it's going to go, and I'm fine with that, and I don't really have to do any more work than that. But we must always remember that at the time, this was absolutely revolutionary music, as well as a revolutionary story, as well as a revolutionary concept set in a revolutionary territory. All of that was underpinning, and it ran as a current throughout, but we are not sensitive to that. And boy, are we ever not sensitive, because we're as far away geographically from that as we possibly can, unless we lived in perhaps Indonesia. So, I mean, we are as far can be from revolutionary Spain, and from France's lensed perspective on it. Bizet's Carmen stands as an epic, not just as an opera, but an epic story about one personality that flourishes, that becomes more free, while another becomes more enslaved. Carmen versus Don Jose has been written about endlessly, decade after decade after decade. And one of the reasons why is because of why, indeed, to me, Act 4 is one of the most beautiful and solemnly tragic moments in opera history. If you have the Covent Garden version of this with Anne-Sophie von Otter singing Carmen, I highly recommend it, because not only are the costumes an incredible parade of untold tens of thousands of pounds of insurable beauty, not only is the set in a blood red of the outside of the bull ring. It's of course done uncut, which I absolutely love, where absolutely every note is preserved, and the whole quadrille comes in and they march in for you, and they're announced, and it's quite amazing and very, very ceremonial, and it's exactly the Spanish bullfight exoticism that we need to understand this milieu and this remarkable color. But not only are all those things present, there is a finely accented hue to this, and that is that there's a bullfight taking place, and that the bullfight is the ultimate metaphor in and of itself for Carmen and José. And it's the ultimate metaphor for obsession, for pursuit, and also for us to try and figure out who exactly is being pursued here. I mean, in so many ways, you just wonder who's the bull and who's the toreador. And in this production, this really, I think, becomes much more of an accented property, which I find is interesting. And I'm hoping that we can talk about that just a little bit more, perhaps, yes. So this is something that I also want to call attention to, that there's something in Act 4 that in our production actually moves through the whole of the work, and not just in that local moment. It's almost as if the bullfight is kind of an incidental thing. Well, it's in Spain, so there's going to be a bullfight, you know. But really, the bullfight is a very, very strong and appropriate literary metaphor that Mila Canalevi wanted there and wanted Bizet to work with. And it's unfortunate if, you know, any of that kind of gets cut out, because then we sort of lose that sense of continuity to it. So I do recommend the Covent Garden version of that and the blood red bull ring. And then you realize that the real bullfight is in fact not in the bull ring at all, with all the cheers that are erupting, but the bullfight is in fact outside the bull ring. And we're the ones who are, and this is so very, very creepy, we're the audience cheering on the fight on stage. So there's something of an irony, a dramatic irony that Bizet plays with very, very acutely well in the music that he writes. And what makes it more tragic is that the independence, the strong woman motif that's crucial, especially to us, is brought forward by Bizet really, really ineluctably well. Because here she is in love. And you know, this was the big debate, you know, through the 20th century. It's just so silly. I mean, really, this is so silly. I have to tell you this. It's so silly I have to tell you this. Is Carmen really in love with the bullfighter? Or is this just another man? So let's have an audience poll. So, is Carmen really in love with the bullfighter? Yes. No. I don't care. I'm with you. You know, I actually, you know, to be honest, I mean, it's okay if you bombard me, but I really think she's in love. I mean, I really think she's fallen for this man in a true way. Or at least, it doesn't matter in the sense that Bizet writes such compelling music that we are part of the whole fate destiny that is dragged inexorably to Carmen being assaulted at the end, right? So that fact that that love is so strong is really something that we must not leave behind as part of the tragedy. It's not just that she dies, but maybe she really has found something in her freedom. And just as she's really at the apex of her life to express that freedom, guess what happens at the end of the opera? So that's something else too that I think we always have to wind in with the bullfight and with the sense of carnage and the sense also of Spanish history too, and that tremendous, unfortunate and horrid violence that has really, really beset the country for a long, long time. And we have to remember too that the upshot of the Spanish Civil War, which comes right after the setting of our opera, that Civil War led, of course, to Franco taking power, on behalf of the nationalists, and that did not end until he died in the 1970s. So it is not easy to be A, Spanish, B, a citizen of Spain, and C, to have to live with that history, because that is a very, very difficult history to go to and to go through. Try doing any kind of research on Spain, which I did in my master's degree. It's very hard, because a lot of the documents that you want to find either were burned in the 1930s, or in many cases, you will find no Spanish scholars who really want to look at Spanish music from the church at all. It's very, very difficult because of the repudiation of the past that was so irrevocable and complete on the behalf of so many Spanish citizens. It wasn't everybody who felt like that, but certainly it makes it very, very difficult when a country has that kind of sense of cutting itself off from its history. And that is something that I feel that by setting it in the 1930s, we look at Carmen at the crossroads. Carmen is at a historical crossroads between past and future, and we know the future. And I wonder very, very much in this direction and how this is going to be costumed, and of course how the sets are going to really bring this out. I wonder just how much when we go in and we look at this Carmen, how much an individual can stand for an entire nation and for an entire nation's troubles. And indeed, for how we look at individuals who become magnets to stand for a nation's troubles. I mean, not that I'm talking about Donald Trump for a moment, but you know, when we actually look at individuals and what they want to stand for and how they want to see their view of their country. I mean, this is always a very, very important concept in the arts. And I think that Carmen has now been put into that position, and rightfully so, and about time. And that's why I'm really encouraging that we look at this production very, very closely.